Hello and welcome to day 3 of the FEO Summit 2021. Before we get started today, I just wanted to reach out and say a great big thank you to the team here at FEO. Everybody's been working tirelessly to come up with a platform that gets a little bit of what our conference is really about. And I think we've done the best we could, and I'm really happy with the work everybody's done. So Debbie Mann, Jay Nyhouse, Pinky Etter, Ann Barker on our board, and Landon Logie, who's been just an absolute treasure to us in the back end, going through these programs and finding out what is the best program for us to use. I'd really like to say a huge thank you from me and from, I'm sure, all of our members for the work you've done getting us together today. Festivals of Events Ontario would also like to thank the following sponsors for their support of the FEO Summit 2021, the Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Cultural Industries, Destination Ontario, SmartServe, Event Hub, and Ticket Pro. Without their support, this summit would not be possible. Getting into our first session today, the session is going to present findings from the Ontario Network of Municipal Event Planners and their post-season surveys that was done around November. They're going to identify the survey data, a selection of emerging industry trends, and potential focus areas for event organizers to prioritize their event recovery efforts. I'd like to welcome today Rebecca Cotter, who's a member of the Ontario Network of Event Planners, to present her findings and to walk us through the latest from the Municipal Network. Rebecca.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. Good morning, everyone. Happy Black History Month and happy FEO Virtual Summit. My name is Rebecca Cotter. I'm the Manager of Special Events with the City of Markham and an executive team member of Ontario's Network of Municipal Event Planners. And it's my pleasure to be here today to offer this session, as Dave mentioned, to walk you through the findings of NMEP's most recent research on the impacts of COVID to our industry, as well as identify a selection of potential trends that may help you with your COVID event planning and COVID recovery efforts. The content addressed today is explored in much greater detail in NMEP's report entitled 2020, The Less Than Eventful Year. A link to the report has been shared in the chat, as I understand it, for the session now. And this report is being released publicly today. So you're officially the first to see it. And I encourage you to download the full report and review it when you have time, because there's a lot of great findings there. So with that, we'll get started. We're scheduled together today for 45 minutes, and my goal in this presentation is to spend 30 minutes sharing the information on the topics related to the first 3 takeaways on this slide here. I'll offer a quick history of the research NMEP has been doing, then explore key elements of the data and findings from our survey, and then from this data offer a few perspectives on trends that you may want to take note of as you move your events forward this year. During each of these sessions, I will welcome questions from the chat, and Dave will kindly bring those forward when I pause to invite for them. And then I hope to use the last 15 minutes together today for a discussion to explore details of interest or any further questions from the audience. So let's get started with a bit of background and context. NMEP, like we've said, is a network of municipal event professionals in Ontario. These colleagues are responsible for the delivery of city-led events or the permitting of municipal property on which are the locations of third-party events. NMEP meets regularly and through COVID has taken a leadership role in developing resources and conducting research to assist with event planning and recovery efforts. NMEP maintains 5 network chapters representing more than 70 municipalities and over 165 members across the province. For any municipal colleagues in today's session who are not yet connected with NMEP, we invite you to send us an email and join. Despite being a municipal network, the research that we've undertaken during COVID, and specifically what I will be sharing in today's presentation, has been collected beyond the municipal sector. So for any non-municipal colleagues in today's session, please know that what I'm about to share pertains directly to you as well. The data shared today represents information gathered from municipalities, independent event organizers, promoters, and event venues. So to get started, just for context, in late March 2020, NMEP undertook its first survey, which was an industry-wide collection of an understanding for the COVID impacts to our industry. This survey aimed to understand those early and anticipated impacts and shared findings that was outlined in a report in April that included knowing that in the first 30 days of the pandemic, it had already had a dramatic effect on our festival and events industry. At that time, 52% of respondents, representing 206 events, indicated already having made the decision to postpone or cancel their 2020 event. These canceled events represented approximately a 27% reduction in projected event attendance, which represented 2.6 million attendees in early 2020. These stats also indicated a disruption to more than 5,600 years of cumulative community festival and events history. And those were our findings in April. On the next slide, in November, to better understand the pandemic's impact throughout the whole 2020 event season, NMEP issued its second province-wide survey. This postseason survey closed November 15th, and today's presentation shares our findings. If you're interested in reading more about the data and insights, I encourage you to download and review the full report. On the next slide, let's dig in. The postseason survey addressed three core lines of questioning. First, what happened to the festival or event in 2020 and what was their reality? Second, if the event modified instead of canceling, what did that look like, both the good and the bad? And third, as of the end of last year, what was the organizer's intention for their event in 2021? These three domains then guided the identification of key themes as potential trends that could inform where our event planning and recovery efforts go from here. So I'll explore each of these three topic areas next in the presentation. On the next slide, we know that 2020 was a difficult year. That's an understatement. But across the industry, the year was made much worse by the harsh reality that is, we were not ready for it. Survey findings indicate that as of the end of 2019, 199 of the 221 events surveyed did not have a contingency plan in place for modifying their event delivery format to anything other than in person. 123 of the 221 events subsequently canceled and did not occur in any format in 2020. Of the 98 events that modified their delivery, 87% indicated either not being prepared or only being somewhat prepared to modify their event to in-person format. So if you're listening to today's presentation and reflecting on these findings, consider the potential for resilience moving forward that could be offered by updating your event's contingency plan accordingly. Next, we'll move on to the critical influence that is the role of COVID-19 restrictions. To highlight these findings, I'm going to show three graphs. The first graph on the slide here illustrates the response to the question, what factors influenced your decision to cancel or modify in 2020? The responses, shown as color-coded bars, are categorized according to the status of the event in 2020. So for example, the blue bars on the graph indicate responses received by events that canceled last year. Orange bars indicate responses received from events that modified to virtual last year, and so on. As indicated on the graph, COVID restrictions such as public health, provincial requirements, and so on received the highest response rate among all response categories. On the next slide, these two graphs indicate the influence of both the status of COVID restrictions on the ability of event teams and the perceived potential for overall post-COVID event success. From these findings, it's clear that the nature and status of COVID-related restrictions had the greatest influence on organizers' decisions to cancel or modify last year's events. COVID restrictions were also cited as the most critical factors influencing the future success of post-COVID events. So for all of us in today's session who are now perhaps intimately familiar with COVID-19 restrictions, as you reflect on these findings, consider the likelihood of the long-term presence of these restrictions and how your event can evolve to live with them. On the next slide, the last point to be made on the survey's findings addressing 2020 decisions and realities is the topic of event status. The graph in the lower right corner shows that the ultimate outcomes of the 221 events surveyed. As previously noted, 123 of the 220 events canceled outright last year. These canceled events represent more than 3,300 cumulative years of community event history in Ontario. The remaining 98 events undertook some effort to modify their delivery format. So next we will look at a selection of the key findings from these modified experiences. Before we do, Dave, can we just quickly check in on any questions from the chat room?
Yeah, Rebecca, we've got 2 questions so far. The first from Paul Rivard, and the second's from Brad McCabe, and they're both looking for information on how to get in touch with the Ontario Event Network, website address, and contact email. Now, Darren, I see, just put up a Gmail account, but if you could share any website information and how to get hold of you guys.
Sure. So we are an ad hoc network, and unfortunately we don't yet have a website. So the best way of getting a hold of us is through the Gmail address. It appeared on my second slide, and these slides will be available for download from the FEO Summit portal. The Gmail address, if you can note it now, is Municipal Event Planners with an S, Municipal Event Planners at gmail.com. And we look forward to hearing from you.
And those are the only 2 questions for now, Rebecca, so
Sure.
Please carry on.
Excellent, thanks, Dave. Okay, so as we get started with a review of the events that modified last year, the next 3 slides highlight a few interesting points from the data shared by these respondents. I encourage anyone interested in learning more about these experiences, perhaps to inform future modifications of your own events, to review the full survey report. There's lots of additional data there that I wasn't able to share in this presentation today. Included in the report is anecdotal advice from our respondents who modified their events to each of the 3 types that we're going to explore now. On this slide, those of you who have experienced delivering any type of virtual event last year may identify with the findings that indicate audience engagement is a significant challenge with virtual events. If this has been your experience, the findings are you're not alone. On the next slide, respondents that modified their event to a drive-in or drive-through format indicated that there might be some benefit in these types of physical experience-based events that support maintaining brand awareness for established in-person events. On the third slide, and not surprisingly, for respondents that downsized their in-person event to small scale, adhering to COVID gathering limits as they were at the time last year, these COVID restrictions proved very challenging. For better or for worse, these experiences in 2020 are the foundation upon which our industry is committed to rebuilding. So now, in my next few slides, we'll take a look at the possible projections for events in 2020 and beyond. So just a reminder, when you're looking at this chart here, the data was collected in November. And while it feels like our frame of reference for what is possible changes practically daily, I hope you will find these insights about plans for 2021 events still valuable. The responses here are color-coded again according to the status of the event in 2020. The blue bar indicates responses received from organizers who canceled their event last year. And there are a couple of points to note. First, you'll see the greatest number of events that canceled in 2020 indicate that the possibility of their event occurring in some format this year is the highest response. And that we take to be very good news. Second, a significant number of 2020 virtual events are indicating a commitment to occur in 2021, but their format is yet undetermined. So amongst the two most prolific response categories, from canceled respondents and virtual respondents, this year is looking up. These findings are rays of light for our colleagues and their communities. Hopefully, as circumstances evolve this year, the trends on this graph will continue to lean towards events taking place in some shape or form. Which brings me to my next slide, and this is an important one. The findings that I outline here and share with you today have only scratched the surface of the valuable information collected by NMEP's Postseason Survey. In order to fully connect the dots, again, I encourage you to review the full survey report because it tells the journey that we've all been on since mid-March last year and hopefully where we're going in the future. To highlight some of these key insights that could shape event planning and recovery beyond the COVID era, the following emerging trends have been identified. First, if you don't yet have a contingency plan in place that outlines a response or responses to restricted in-person gatherings, get one. Emergency management fundamentals teach preparedness as the first principle of crisis response. COVID is proving to be a long road. Preparedness reduces stress, streamlines reactions, and promotes resilience. We recommend everyone take the time to update their contingency plans. Second, the elements of accessibility and inclusion offered by virtual events are here to stay. And so they should be. Though I think it's also fair to say that virtual events are not an equivalent replacement for in-person experiences. This makes space for hybrid events. Hybrid events, being some assembly of both in-person and virtual event components, may be the road that we travel down on our way to the future. While the specific shape and form of each hybrid event remains likely unique based on its team and individual circumstances, proactive thinking suggests gone are the days that an event attendee cannot engage with or participate in some version of an event experience because they are unhealthy, physically unable, or conflictingly scheduled. Hybrid events are likely to face an increasing demand moving forward in order to continue to accommodate all facets of the event experience. Third, NMEP's survey report offers a selection of new event sponsorship opportunities associated with specifically virtual and drive-in events that can add viability to both sponsors and their audiences. For virtual events, have you considered sponsor-branded augmented reality or virtual reality experiences? Or have you considered sponsor-branded gamification elements? For drive-in events, have you considered a new car test drive experience along your closed event route? Or have you considered sponsor advertisements and mentions on your dedicated event radio channel. Survey findings have indicated that modified events maintain brand awareness and allow for continued audience engagement. These opportunities also are an investment in maintaining important sponsor-stakeholder relationships, so leverage them. Lastly, speaking of stakeholders, this trend is a big one. Survey respondents indicate that, at a minimum, receiving stakeholder support equal to pre-COVID levels is critical to event recovery. Receiving support up to 50% greater, or even at times up to 100% greater than pre-COVID levels, was also indicated as necessary for certain stakeholder groups, including volunteers, community partners, and local businesses. So consider, are you investing in your stakeholders during these turbulent times? NMEP's survey report offers a selection of stakeholder engagement or re-engagement methods for utilization, including staying connected with your stakeholders, like volunteers and vendors, by calling or sending social media shoutouts, or getting stakeholders, like sponsors and community partners, involved in your other initiatives, like webinars and staff training sessions that are happening now during COVID. And supporting the efforts of local businesses and local supplier companies by amplifying their messaging on your social channels or otherwise helping them reach your audiences. As they say, we're all in this together. Use this time to invest in your stakeholders so that they can stick around to reinvest in you. So this concludes the presentation portion of today's session. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share these findings. I've mentioned a few times that what I've demonstrated here in these slides just simply scratches the surface of the valuable insight that was shared with NMEP by the survey respondents. If you are a survey respondent or one of your clients responded to our survey, please allow me this opportunity to thank you. We could not have done this research without you. I hope this session has been informative, and it looks like we're almost right on schedule, leaving time now at the end for a discussion. Maybe we can check back in on any questions in the chat room, and then I welcome anyone to raise their hand or provide feedback or questions that we can have a full room discussion with.
So Rebecca, we've got a question from Darren in the chat room, and it reads, drive-in event considerations. What about the cyclists? Create a bike area. Not everyone has access to a vehicle, and you create barriers for marginalized populations to participate. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Darren, for the comment. I'll first offer a caveat that I'm happy to speak from either anecdotally what has been my personal experience with modified events, or on behalf of the NMEP network's members who have shared their experiences. But I do definitely welcome anyone in the room here today who can offer a response to jump in or throw up their hand. Yes, we do recognize that specific to drive-in events, those who don't have cars, choose not to have cars, live in metropolitan centers where they don't need a car. These types of events do present a barrier to participation. And there have been events that have explored alternatives under COVID restrictions to exactly how to keep their events safe and allow people to continue to gather. I can't speak specifically to the biking option or the cycling option, though I think it's definitely one worth exploring. If there's anyone who has experience, feel free to throw it in the chat. The sensitivity around cyclists and groups of people who show up, even pedestrians, to locations where there are drive-in events being hosted. I am aware that those constitute as in-person gatherings that have challenged what we're trying to do under current COVID restrictions. So definitely something worth noting.
A number of other comments, mostly wanting to know how to get a hold of the presentation, and Jay will make those links available either in chat or on our FEO conference site, so you can go there and download them. A question from Brandon Little. Do you know what the most popular platforms were for events that went viral or virtual?
The short answer is no. It wasn't a survey question that we asked for a response. There is some anecdotal information in the report. So again, I do encourage under each of the 3 sections for virtual events, drive-in events, and small-scale events, anyone considering these modifications, read the anecdotal report information where we've captured word-for-word comments that came to us through the survey. There might be some platforms recommended there, or perhaps those who have experience can share their platforms in the chat here.
And Jay has that information up now for everybody. Brad McCabe wants to know, have you seen any events that have actually monetized their digital and social assets for sponsorship? I know a lot of people we talk to, at best, they can cover their costs, but I haven't heard of a lot of people that have actually monetized a digital platform. Did your survey find that?
So monetized in what
Make
sense?
Money off of sponsorship, like generate revenue through the process.
Sure. Well, I think it's about price point. To answer the question from the survey's perspective, there is a little bit of, again, anecdotal information that was gathered on sponsorship specific to virtual events. We did not ask a question about specifically monetization, but I think it is about price point. If you're approaching your virtual event from simply a cost recovery point of view, then you're likely to price your assets maybe lower than they're even worth. Looking at opportunities such as something like social media integration, if your platform offers, like for example, a live Twitter feed where you can link your sponsor with your audience in real time, there may be some monetization opportunities that come through the organic sharing of content by utilizing something like a social media platform integration with a sponsorship experience opportunity. I do want to maybe circle back because the topic of sponsorship is a good one that I think pertains to augmented reality and virtual reality opportunities for virtual events. And this is something that we're seeing anecdotally coming through. Perhaps the upcoming speakers in the FEO Summit will have more content to offer. I personally have experienced sessions presented by subject matter experts and thought leaders on AR and VR. And it's a very costly investment, but it looks to have great potential for the future of virtual events beyond COVID. So we all hope and appreciate that we'll return to an in-person experience sooner than later. But the point being made in the survey about hybrid and virtual, the accessibility and the inclusion opportunities that platform or those platforms allow, that's not going away. And you see with especially some concerts and festivals modifying to AR and VR internationally, there's some really great opportunities to integrate sponsorship within those environments. You could have a sponsored stage experience within your VR environment that presents, though the individual attendee is still maybe sitting at home while they're engaging with your experience, presents the same way as having that same stage sponsored at your in-person experience. So there are some great synergies there.
We have another question from Lori Albanese. And with drive-in events, could they involve local municipal transit or local bus companies for free bus rides into drive-in and drive-through events? Has your network talked about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Lori has a lot of experience in Niagara Falls with drive-through events, as many of us do in the municipal space. I know there are private producers. If those are on the chat today, they can jump in and share their experience with how transit companies, municipal, regional bus services have been able to support, especially going back to the point made earlier, prospective attendees who maybe don't have cars would be able to participate in a drive-in or drive-through experience, utilizing still COVID restrictions as they pertain to mass transit. And obviously the transit professionals would be the experts to be able to counsel on how that works and what that would look like. But reach out to all of your stakeholders, especially now that we are, call it 11 months into this pandemic, and 2021, though it looks optimistic, again, from a modified format point of view, might not be what we wanted it to be last year with respect to in-person events this year. If you haven't talked to these stakeholders in a while, call your bus service, call your local sponsors and vendors, reach out, find out how they're doing. We are all modifying our individual lines of business. They are likely modifying as well. And a lot of great brainstorming and ideas can come from reconnecting in the preseason period now to get ready for whatever you can do in 2021.
So our next question comes from Sharon Doherty, and she's in Orangeville, and she said they've had an issue with walk-in and bike-in participation during summer concert series in August. That was a drive-in format, as the provincial guidelines did not allow for this blending of both drive-in and walk-in at the time. In the future, once restrictions are lifted, this would work well. Any comment on?
First, I think as we've discussed here, your experience, you're not alone in your experience. You know, humans, if nothing else, are very unpredictable. And so as much as you tell humans, you know, that you must have a car to show up, or as a pedestrian, you know, you are not allowed in this space or you cannot access this space, it ultimately won't stop people from trying. There are some best practices emerging around, you know, how to select a venue with respect to the format of your drive-in event that allows, you know, you to circumvent some of these challenges with respect to people showing up. But I know that that's not always a perfect solution. Colleagues in various metropolitan cities that we've spoken with in our network, some of the bigger cities, have these challenges because they want to host drive-in events, you know, in the downtown core. It's very difficult to prevent people from also attending. So what I can simply say is that you're not alone in this experience. I think from my point of view, from the conversations that I've been a part of with respect to this challenge, it does come down to choosing the right venue. I know in Markham, you know, for drive-in events, they are not municipally produced, but some of the privately produced events that we've experienced in our jurisdiction have happened at our fairgrounds, which is a private property. It is not a walkable location, and you know, they've been able to navigate the balance between drive-in attendees and unforeseen walk-up or walk-in attendees.
Our next question comes from Paul Regard, and just sort of setting it up for everybody, there's 440 municipalities in Ontario who all do things a little bit differently and interact amongst their departments differently. So that's certainly one of the challenges we all have to work with as we, you know, especially independent producers going from city and municipality to municipality. And Paul asks, do all outdoor drive-in events have to follow local health municipal guidelines? I've experienced different rules from separate health units for drive-in concerts. Example, one allowed sitting outside a car, in another, you have to stay in your car. Do you have any feeling back and forth?
Yeah, Dave, I think what you've said is accurate, and we spend a lot of time in our municipal network conversations and meetings discussing the similarities and the differences between jurisdictions, regions, cities, even neighboring cities. that can make it challenging to navigate these types of experiences. Our advice, to those who are already doing it and those who have not yet reached out, is it's best to speak with your local subject matter experts, whether that's your local public health service, your local municipal special event office. They're going to be the ones that can guide you on specifically the event application process in terms of what requirements there are in place, who you have to talk to, and how to navigate those systems. So there is unfortunately no answer that I'm aware of that is a one size fits all to this question. Fundamentally, we are all governed by the guidelines that the province publishes. We all go to the same internet source for what those guidelines are. Perhaps we call the 1-800 number to receive clarification, which in my experience has oftentimes resulted in different callers getting different information, which is challenging itself. But at the end of the day, we do all follow those provincial guidelines. How they are interpreted, we've definitely experienced to be on a spectrum.
Amanda Murray writes in a question to us, and it reads, was there any research comparing free virtual events versus paid ticket events in terms of success rates, online engagement, and participation?
Sure. The answer from the perspective of the survey is that we did not have a survey question that explored specifically this topic, though we have had this conversation a few times amongst the municipal network, and it may not be a shock to most who have experience in virtual, but if you are considering virtual for the first time, typically the registration approach or the registered event, whether it is paid or simply an administrative function of determining and understanding who will be attending, using a registration model is seen to have greater success because it invokes a sense of commitment amongst your attendees. It's not a perfect science, I don't think in anyone's experience, but if you put a registration process in place, people tend to think twice about whether or not they will actually commit and actually attend your virtual event. There will still be a drop-off rate or a no-show rate, but any anecdotal evidence that I've seen, any conversations that we've had between registered and non-registered virtual events, there's no sense of commitment. They see your promotion, they indicate on Facebook or through your email system that they want to show up, and 9 times out of 10, those types of events have a much higher drop-off rate. So it doesn't speak to the paid and unpaid, and I personally would be very interested in learning from that experience. If anyone has something to share in the chat, or they can email us, we can add that to the findings.
Our next question comes from Shelley, and I'm not really sure the gist of it, but Rebecca, you might be able to jump in on it. We also received proposals for from Hotels Live that toured across the country. Unfortunately, we were in lockdown at that time. They were supposed to be in our area, but might be an opportunity for other municipalities. Do you know about Hotels Live?
I don't know if it's one of the maybe traveling event. I'm not sure. One of the provincial events that kind of moves around looking for a new host community every year. Shelley, if there's more information that you can share, we'd be
and we're happy
to put that forward. Well.
Yeah. The next question, Rebecca, comes from Spencer, and I might have missed it, but are there plans for a new survey as the outlook of most events this summer and throughout 2021 has changed a lot since November? We have several that thought they would be happening as of November and are just now deciding to cancel or postpone to 2022.
Sure. So NMEP will definitely continue to entertain opportunities to conduct more research and provide more findings back out to the industry. We welcome your suggestions. I can say that we had our first NMEP provincial network call 2 weeks ago, and one of the survey poll questions that we put forward to about the 100 participants who were on that call at the time was a question specifically about 2021. So it looked very similar to that 2021 graph that I showed in the presentation, asking, recognizing the difference between November and today, what are your plans for 2021? Though it's still early days in January, many plans were still yet undecided. So my experience now, having conducted 2 of these industry-wide provincial surveys, is that I think it's still early days yet for groups and organizers, municipalities, private event promoters to truly know what their year looks like. Perhaps a lot hinges on what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks with respect to information coming from the province about coming out of lockdown or what the future of COVID restrictions look like. And that last point there really speaks to the importance of shaping and understanding our knowledge around those COVID restrictions, to understand not only in a reactive sense, you know, what the province is telling us, and then what can we do, but how can we prepare for the future so that when the future comes, we already have scenarios and plans built into our business plan or our annual plan for this year. So with respect to conducting a future survey, to my mind, I think the findings would be maybe more valuable either mid-year or again post-year this year, looking back on the decision-making trajectory that everyone here and our colleagues across the province undertook this year. Right now, we're waiting to see what happens. People have the best of intentions, but those intentions could be negated by increased infection rates or differentiating lockdown or restrictions across the different public health units and jurisdictions in the province. So looking at some future surveying efforts retroactively is probably where we're going next.
So we've got about 3 minutes left, Rebecca. We've got a question from Jason who's asking, are you seeing any collaboration between municipal event planners and community sports groups, specifically around shared challenges between community events and sport event hosting?
I can speak anecdotally from what I'm aware others have experienced. Again, if there are those on the call who have direct experience, please feel free to just note it so others can reach out to you. Yes, I have heard of partnerships specifically between municipal, recreation services, for example, and their key provincial sport organizations. Most of what I am aware of right now pertains to, 3 or 4 or 5 months ago when we were in a lesser COVID lockdown state, whereby we were looking at indoor activities, different from outdoor activities, being possible in recreation centers. Sport organizations, as many of us are aware, are largely provincially and or nationally governed, and they have return to play guidelines. So whether it's swimming, gymnastics, soccer, etc., these groups are a bit ahead of, I'll say, where we are as an event industry, because we do not have an ultimate governing body that provides a framework or parameters within which play can return. And so these groups, these sport organizations, have been able to work with municipal recreation teams to find spaces to bring specifically their athletes back, not necessarily spectators yet, but bring their athletes back. And then I've heard stories about, swimming, diving, aquatics, bringing their athletes into pools when pools were reopened, and then live streaming or offering some sort of virtual capture of the activity, perhaps the sport competition that was happening, that then gets, shared out to the audience and even to judges for the purpose of having tournaments.
So that wraps up our session with Rebecca Cotter from the Ontario Network of Municipal Event Planners. Rebecca, thank you very much. As always, a very informative and statistics-driven presentation. We really appreciate it from all of us at FEO.
Thanks,
There
Dave.
was
My
a
pleasure.
few questions in chat that weren't answered, but we'll try to get them to you. And, you know, maybe between you and our team, we can get back to the people with some of the answers. So again, Rebecca, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
That's great. Thanks so much. Thanks, folks. Enjoy the summit.